Okay, welcome back. David Hearst, you're still with us?
Yes, I am indeed.
Okay, we have lost our commercial stations. They're on commercial break right now. We're still on our non-commercial stations, and we're still on television, on Free Speech TV, on Direct and Dish, and about half our audience is with us. So I want to continue this conversation for the next 4 minutes during this break. Then we'll hit another break just like the one we just did, and we'll summarize for our commercial audience, what we discussed, and we'll have, 4 or 5 minutes to finish up the half hour. Is that all right with you?
Sure, fine.
Okay, great. So as you were saying, if you could continue that line of thought.
Well, this situation where America appears to be giving mixed signals to a very, very polarized Gulf, which in itself is highly armed and full of money and running a whole series of proxy conflicts right across North Africa and the Middle East, is inherently destabilizing. If America produced one message, that would be fine, but it's actually putting two messages across. One from its president, which basically says supports the moves against Qatar, and another from a whole bunch of anonymous sources, but I assume they are State Department and Pentagon, who are basically saying, no, hang on a moment, Qatar is useful to us. And they're talking about not just as the site of the biggest military base, the U.S. military base, and the head of the forward center of CENTCOM in the Middle East, but also politically. These sources are saying it's good that Qatar is hosting Hamas. It's good that Qatar is hosting the Taliban because it gives us a neutral space to which to talk to them.
And I would think that to the extent that Al Jazeera is relatively independent media, I realize it's state-sponsored, but they do real reporting as opposed to just pure propaganda like you'd see on Saudi media, for example. That would even be consistent with American values.
Yeah, we're not talking about American values here. We're talking about
American interests.
Realpolitik, and certainly with Trump, he really hasn't mentioned in any of his foreign policy speeches or any of his initiatives the words human rights or democracy. He's said very, very plainly he's not interested in that.
That's true. His embrace of Duterte, his embrace of,
absolutely.
Despot after despot.
So is he interested in free speech? I don't know. But,
but I'm thinking the Department of Defense and the Department of State have to be looking at what Trump just tweeted, going, "Oh my God!" Not only has he inserted himself on the side of the Sunnis into the Sunni-Shia conflict when he went over to Saudi Arabia, but now he's inserting himself into an inter-Sunni battle.
Yes, and it's highly destabilizing, not just for Qatar, which is a small state, but for this has a ripple effect. There are 300,000 Egyptian workers in Qatar, all sending money back home. Do they have to go because Egypt has signed on to this coalition against Qatar? There are 50,000 mixed marriages. There are cars trying to get across the border. This isn't just. I mean, originally when I wrote an article about this last week, I used the word spat. I now sort of regret using that word because it sort of trivializes the conflict.
This is huge.
Actually happening.
We're talking with David Hearst, editor-in-chief of the Middle East Eye. MiddleEastEye.net is the website. He's based out of the UK. David, we were talking about how this action by basically a group of autocratic Sunni kingdoms against the Sunni kingdom of Qatar, which hosts Al Jazeera, which also hosts CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command, from which we do all our military activity in the Middle East, and which also hosts a huge U.S. military air base, which is used for our operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and everything else. That the State Department and the Defense Department have to be very, very concerned about this, and yet the President of the United States has just tweeted out saying, see, I told the Saudis they need to ferret out the funders of terrorism, and they just found them. It's Qatar. We have just 2 minutes left, David. This seems crazy to me. What kind of damage is being done, and what could be the fallout of this?
Well, the worst case scenario, you could have regime change in Qatar, and you could have one part of the Al Thani family displacing another, and Qatar would turn into Bahrain. It would turn into a satrap, a province of Saudi Arabia. This goes back a long, long way, and there's a long history of animosity about the creation of Qatar when the whole thing was organized by the Brits at the end of the empire and the First World War. But that's the worst case scenario, that actually Qatar, there's a regime change in Qatar. There are many other options. It could be that the emir suddenly folds and changes his foreign policy, closes down Al Jazeera. But at the moment, he's not doing that. He's quite defiant. He had himself pictured kissing Sheikh al-Qaradawi, who is one of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. And so that was his response to suggestions that he abandon political Islam. So he's being really quite defiant.
Wow.
And he's put troops out on the border as well. I just want to add one point. When we say the Saudis and the Emiratis, we're not actually talking about the whole of the royal family in Saudi Arabia. What we're talking about is a policy that has been engineered by a 31-year-old lad called Mohammed bin Salman, who's the youngest son of the king, who is the deputy crown prince. He's not even the crown prince. Right. There's another power source around the crown prince himself, who's a much older and wiser guy, his elder cousin.
Who's keeping his mouth shut on this.
Who's keeping his mouth shut, called Mohammed bin Naif, who absolutely doesn't want this policy, who is completely and utterly against any form. He's got a
so we may be looking at a battle inside the Saudi royal family being played out here.
Indeed. And so
amazing.
There's an internal reason for this as well. So it's much more unstable than just saying the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has decided to do this.
Yeah. David Hearst, brilliant. Middle East Eye, EYE.net. Thank you, sir.